My sister-in-law gave everyone gifts except me. I took everything away from her. My sister-in-law Rachel had been deliberately excluding me from gift exchanges for 7 years since I married her brother Kevin, and she made it obvious every single time. At Christmas, she'd hand out beautifully wrapped packages to Kevin's parents, his other siblings, their spouses, every cousin, every child, even the neighbor who watered their plants. But when it came to me, she'd look right through me like I didn't exist. She'd say she ran out of time or money or ideas, but then pull out an extra gift for someone who stopped by unexpectedly. At her birthday party, she'd thank everyone for their presents individually except mine, which she'd leave unopened in the corner. At family white elephant exchanges, she'd bring exactly enough gifts for everyone minus one and pretend she miscounted when I sat there empty-handed. Kevin said Rachel was just forgetful, but Rachel remembered every birthday, anniversary, and pet adoption date for 37 other family members. She had a color-coded calendar with everyone's preferences and sizes and wish lists except for mine, because I apparently didn't exist in her world. His parents, George and Marie, would awkwardly try to share their gifts with me while Rachel watched smirking. Other family members started bringing extra generic gifts, assuming Rachel would forget me again, which she always did. The worst was our wedding, where Rachel gave Kevin an envelope with $5,000 for his future and told everyone at the microphone that this was for her brother only, specifically not for me, because blood family needed to look out for each other. She made eye contact with me while saying it to make sure I understood I would never be family. Last Christmas was when Rachel really showed her cruelty. She'd organized Secret Santa for the whole family with a $100 limit. Everyone got assignments except somehow my name wasn't in the hat. Rachel said she must have forgotten to write it down, but everyone else was already matched, so I could just watch everyone else open gifts. She gave Kevin a watch worth $300 in front of me and said real siblings didn't need spending limits. She gave his mother designer perfume and his father golf clubs, and his cousin's baby a savings bond. But when 5-year-old Timmy asked why Aunt didn't get anything, Rachel said sometimes people don't deserve presents. A child asked why I didn't deserve presents, and Rachel just shrugged, saying, "Not everyone can be special." I spent that entire Christmas watching 40 people open gifts while sitting there like furniture Rachel had to walk around. That's when I learned something interesting about Rachel's situation. She'd been living off her grandmother Dorothy's promise of inheritance for years, running up credit cards and taking loans because Dorothy was 93 and worth $2 million. Rachel was the only grandchild who visited regularly, and Dorothy had told everyone Rachel would get everything for being such a devoted granddaughter. Rachel had already spent probably $300,000 she didn't have yet on a house and cars and jewelry, assuming Dorothy would die soon. What Rachel didn't know was that Dorothy had been talking to me at every family gathering while Rachel was busy ignoring my existence. Dorothy would sit next to me during gift exchanges and pat my hand while watching Rachel exclude me. Dorothy asked me once why Rachel was so cruel, and I just said some people show their true character through small actions. Dorothy started requesting I visit her without telling Rachel. We'd have tea and talk about her travels and her late husband, and how disappointed she was in how materialistic Rachel had become. Dorothy said Rachel only visited to ask about the will and check if Dorothy was still healthy enough to live alone. Dorothy said Rachel had been measuring her house for renovations while Dorothy was still living in it. One day, Dorothy asked me to drive her to her lawyer's office for a routine update to her will. She didn't tell anyone else about this appointment. A month later, Dorothy passed peacefully in her sleep at 94. Rachel immediately started planning what to do with her inheritance. She quit her job the day after the funeral, saying she'd never have to work again. She listed her current house for sale and put an offer on a mansion. She traded in her car for a luxury SUV she couldn't actually afford yet. She threw a party to celebrate Dorothy's life, which was really to celebrate her own windfall. At the will reading, Rachel showed up in a new designer outfit she'd bought on credit. She brought a notebook to write down account numbers and property addresses. She'd already contacted contractors about renovating Dorothy's house. She sat in the front row with a huge smile while the lawyer started reading. The lawyer announced Dorothy had left her entire estate to various charities and family members who'd shown genuine kindness without expecting rewards. Kevin got $50,000 for being a good nephew. His parents got the vacation home. His cousins got trust funds for their children. I got Dorothy's jewelry collection worth $400,000 because Dorothy said I was the only one who treated her like a grandmother instead of a bank. Rachel got Dorothy's collection of refrigerator magnets from different states because Dorothy said Rachel needed to remember there were more important things than money. Rachel screamed that I'd manipulated Dorothy and stolen her inheritance. Rachel lunges across the lawyer's desk trying to grab the will documents while screaming that I seduced Dorothy and poisoned her mind against her own granddaughter. The lawyer calmly presses a button under his desk, and 2 security guards appear within seconds to restrain Rachel as she thrashes and shrieks accusations at me. Her designer jacket tears at the shoulder as one guard grabs her arm, and she kicks over a chair trying to reach the papers spread across the mahogany surface. The other guard blocks her path, and she spits at him, calling him a traitor for protecting a thief. Her face turns red and veins bulge in her neck as she screams that I stole everything from her, and she'll make sure everyone knows what I did. The guards drag her backward toward the door while she claws at the air, reaching for the documents that list Dorothy's final wishes. Her expensive heels scrape against the carpet, leaving black marks as she fights against the guards pulling her away from the desk. Kevin sits frozen in his chair, staring at me with an expression I can't read while his parents try to calm Rachel down. I feel everyone's eyes on me and my hands shake as I clutch my purse, wondering if they all think I manipulated a dying woman, even though I genuinely loved Dorothy. Marie touches Rachel's shoulder, trying to soothe her, but Rachel jerks away and screams that her own family is choosing a stranger over blood. George stands up and tries to grab Rachel's other arm, but she pulls free and lunges toward me again, making me flinch back in my chair. The guards tighten their grip, and one of them warns Rachel that they'll call the police if she doesn't calm down immediately. Kevin still hasn't moved or said anything, and his silence feels worse than Rachel's screaming, because I need him to defend me, but he just sits there staring. Rachel's husband, Philip, finally manages to pull her out of the office, while she screams that she'll contest the will and prove I brainwashed Dorothy. The lawyer waits until the door closes before explaining that Dorothy anticipated this reaction, and left a detailed letter explaining her reasoning for each bequest. He pulls a folder from his desk drawer, and I see Dorothy's handwriting on the top page, which makes my throat tighten. The room feels too quiet after Rachel's screaming, and I can hear the clock on the wall ticking and someone breathing heavily behind me. The lawyer reads Dorothy's letter aloud, and my eyes fill with tears as she describes our tea visits, and how I never asked about money or inheritance. Dorothy wrote that Rachel measured her house for renovations, while Dorothy was still living there, and only visited to check if Dorothy was still healthy enough to live alone. The lawyer's voice stays steady as he reads Dorothy's words about watching Rachel ignore me at family gatherings, and how disappointed she felt seeing her granddaughter show such deliberate cruelty. Dorothy described the Secret Santa incident where she watched me sit alone while everyone else opened gifts, and Rachel told little Timmy that some people don't deserve presents. My tears fall onto my hands folded in my lap, and I try to wipe them away quickly, but more keep coming. Kevin's parents, George and Marie, exchange uncomfortable glances as the lawyer continues reading how Dorothy was disappointed in Rachel's materialism and how Rachel had spent $300,000 she didn't actually have yet. I see Marie dab her eyes with a tissue while George stares at his hands like he's ashamed of something he should have stopped years ago. The lawyer reads about Rachel quitting her job the day after Dorothy's funeral and listing her house for sale before Dorothy was even buried. Dorothy wrote that she knew Rachel never loved her as a grandmother, but only as a source of money, and that broke her heart more than anything else. George clears his throat and shifts in his chair, and I wonder what he's thinking about all the times he watched Rachel exclude me and said nothing. The lawyer hands me a separate sealed envelope that Dorothy left specifically for me with instructions to read it privately. Kevin finally speaks for the first time, asking if we can go home now, his voice flat and distant in a way that makes my stomach drop. He stands up without looking at me and walks toward the door while I'm still holding the envelope with Dorothy's handwriting on the front. The lawyer tells us he'll handle the paperwork for the jewelry collection, and we can pick everything up next week after the estate processes through probate. Kevin opens the door and waits in the hallway without saying anything to his parents, who are still sitting in their chairs looking lost. We drive home in complete silence, and Kevin goes straight to the bedroom and closes the door. I sit on the couch holding Dorothy's envelope and the jewelry collection paperwork, feeling like I should be happy, but instead I just feel hollow and scared about what this means for my marriage. The envelope feels heavy in my hands, and I trace Dorothy's handwriting with my finger, remembering how she used to write me little notes about which tea she wanted me to bring for our visits. I finally open Dorothy's letter, and she writes that she knows Rachel will accuse me of manipulation, but the truth is, I was the only one who saw her as a person instead of a bank account. Dorothy explains she changed her will 6 months ago after Rachel asked if Dorothy had considered speeding things along by stopping her heart medication. My hands shake reading that last part because it means Rachel literally suggested Dorothy should die faster so Rachel could get her money. Dorothy writes that she never told anyone else about that conversation because she wanted to see if Rachel would show genuine remorse or concern, but Rachel only visited twice more in those final 6 months. The letter describes how Rachel spent those visits measuring rooms and asking about property values and insurance policies, instead of asking how Dorothy felt, or if she needed anything. Dorothy wrote that she pretended not to notice Rachel's coldness, because she hoped her granddaughter would remember what family actually meant before it was too late. Kevin emerges from the bedroom and asks to read Dorothy's letter to me. I hesitate but hand it over because I have nothing to hide, and I watch his face change as he reads about Rachel's comment about the heart medication. His jaw tightens and his hands grip the paper so hard it crinkles at the edges, and I see his eyes moving back and forth reading the same lines over and over. Kevin sets the letter down on the coffee table with both hands like it might fall apart if he's not careful. He pulls out his phone and walks into the kitchen, and I hear him dial. His voice sounds different when his mom answers, kind of flat and tired. He tells Marie she needs to get George on the phone too because there's something in Dorothy's letter they need to know about. I stay on the couch holding the jewelry paperwork and staring at the crinkled pages of Dorothy's letter on the table. Kevin's voice gets louder in the kitchen, and I hear him say, Rachel asked Dorothy about stopping her heart medication to speed things along. There's silence, and then Kevin says it again slower, like his parents didn't hear him right the first time. His voice cracks when he repeats the part about speeding things along, and I hear him clear his throat twice. He stays on the phone for 20 more minutes and I sit there picking at a loose thread on the couch cushion. When Kevin comes back, his eyes are red and he goes straight to the bedroom without looking at me. And I don't sleep that night because Kevin tosses and turns next to me and gets up 3 times to pace around the house. The next morning, my phone shows 6 missed calls from Rachel's number before 7 in the morning. Kevin's phone starts ringing at 7:30 and doesn't stop. I count 17 calls before Kevin finally grabs his phone off the nightstand and answers it on speaker. Rachel's voice comes through high and frantic, asking what lies I told Dorothy and demanding to know why Kevin's parents won't return her calls. Kevin sits up in bed and rubs his face with one hand. Rachel says the letter has to be forged because Dorothy loved her and would never cut her out completely over some misunderstanding. She's talking so fast I can barely understand her, and she keeps saying Dorothy promised her everything since she was 12 years old. Kevin interrupts and asks Rachel if she really told Dorothy to stop taking her heart medication. The phone goes completely quiet. I watch Kevin's jaw tighten while we wait. 30 seconds pass and I can hear Rachel breathing on the other end. Finally, Rachel says Dorothy misunderstood because she was asking about medication side effects for a friend who was having problems. Kevin's hand grips the phone so hard his knuckles turn white. He tells Rachel that Dorothy was sharp until the day she died and wouldn't misunderstand someone suggesting she stop taking life-saving medication. Rachel starts crying and her words come out all broken up about losing her house and her car and everything she worked for. She asks Kevin if he even cares that his sister is about to be homeless. Kevin asks why she quit her job before Dorothy even died if she wasn't counting on the inheritance money. Rachel screams that everyone plans for inheritance and it's not fair that I get $400,000 in jewelry when I'm not even blood family. Kevin tells her she made her own choices and hangs up. He throws his phone on the bed and goes to take a shower. I hear the water running for a long time. Over the next week, I learn things about Rachel's money situation from different family members who call to check on us. Marie tells me Rachel owes $200,000 on credit cards she maxed out buying furniture and clothes and trips. Kevin's cousin calls to say Rachel took out a $100,000 loan using the expected inheritance as guarantee. George mentions Rachel refinanced her house twice to pull out money for a new kitchen and a pool she never finished building. The house is worth less than what she owes on it now. Marie says Rachel's husband Philip is panicking because he didn't know how bad the debt was until the will reading. Philip calls Kevin on Thursday asking if we can loan them money to avoid foreclosure. Kevin says no without explaining why. Philip's voice gets loud through the phone saying I'm keeping Kevin from helping his own sister, and that family is supposed to look out for each other. Kevin hangs up on him. He tosses his phone on the counter and tells me his sister and her husband can figure out their own mess. Margot calls my phone directly on Friday afternoon. She says she always knew Rachel was cruel to me, and she's glad Dorothy saw through Rachel's fake devotion. Margot admits she brought extra generic gifts to family events for years, because watching Rachel exclude me made her so uncomfortable she couldn't just sit there. She says other cousins did the same thing and they all talked about it behind Rachel's back. Margot tells me Rachel is texting the whole family asking for loans and everyone is saying no because they know Rachel won't pay them back. I make an appointment with a jewelry appraiser Dorothy's lawyer recommended to get the collection properly valued for insurance. The appraiser is an older woman who works out of a small office downtown. She opens the cases Dorothy left me and makes small gasping sounds as she examines each piece under her magnifying lens. She explains several pieces are worth way more than the estimated $400,000 because Dorothy had excellent taste and collected antiques. A ruby necklace is from the 1800s. An emerald bracelet belonged to some duchess. The appraiser writes everything down in a leather notebook and says the real value is probably closer to $600,000. I sit there staring at the jewelry spread across her desk, thinking about Dorothy wearing these pieces to family gatherings, while Rachel ignored both of us. Kevin's parents invite us to dinner on Sunday. Marie opens the door and hugs me for a long time before letting us inside. George pours wine and we sit at their dining room table with the good dishes Marie only uses for special occasions. Marie apologizes for not standing up to Rachel more forcefully over the years. She says she knew Rachel was excluding me, but she thought it was just sister-in-law jealousy that would fade over time. George says they didn't realize how calculated and cruel it was until they heard about the heart medication comment. He tells Kevin they failed both of us by making excuses for Rachel's behavior. Marie starts crying and says Dorothy was right to leave me the jewelry because I treated her like a grandmother, instead of someone who owed the family money. Marie touches my arm gently and asks if I plan to sell Dorothy's jewelry collection now that it's officially mine. I open my mouth expecting to say yes because $400,000 could change our lives, but instead I hear myself say no. The word surprises me as much as it surprises Marie. I explain that every piece reminds me of our tea visits, and the stories Dorothy told about wearing the ruby necklace to her first symphony, or the emerald bracelet on her honeymoon in Paris. Marie's eyes fill with tears, and she pulls me into a tight hug saying that's exactly why Dorothy left the collection to me, because I loved the stories more than the value. George pats my shoulder and says Dorothy knew what she was doing when she changed her will. Kevin drives us home and we're both quiet in the car, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. We pull into our driveway around 8 that evening, and I'm already thinking about taking a hot shower when I notice Rachel's car parked on the street. Rachel gets out and marches toward our front door before we can even close the car doors. She's changed out of her designer outfit into jeans and a sweatshirt, but her face still has that desperate, angry look from the lawyer's office. Kevin steps in front of me as Rachel reaches our porch demanding to see the jewelry collection right now. She says several pieces belong to her great-grandmother and should stay in the blood family instead of going to someone who married into it. I tell her the jewelry is Dorothy's to leave to whoever she wanted and Dorothy wanted me to have it. Rachel's voice gets louder, saying I manipulated a 94-year-old woman and stole what rightfully belonged to her. Kevin tells his sister to leave our property immediately. Rachel ignores him and tries to push past into our house. Kevin blocks the doorway and pulls out his phone, saying he'll call the police if she doesn't leave in the next 60 seconds. Rachel stares at him like she can't believe her own brother would choose his wife over his sister. She backs down the porch steps, pointing at me and saying this isn't over before getting in her car and driving away with her tires squealing. I check my phone the next morning and see Rachel posted something on social media overnight. The post says she's devastated because someone manipulated her vulnerable elderly grandmother and stole her inheritance from the rightful family. Rachel wrote that Dorothy wasn't thinking clearly in her final months, and someone took advantage of that confusion to redirect money that should have gone to blood relatives. The post has already gotten 15 comments, and I feel sick reading them until I realize most comments are defending me. Kevin's cousin Margot wrote that Rachel is rewriting history, and everyone knows Rachel only visited Dorothy to ask about the will. Another cousin points out that Dorothy was sharp as a tack until the day she died and made her own choices. Kevin's uncle comments that maybe Rachel should look in the mirror and ask why Dorothy decided to change her will in the first place. Kevin's Aunt Aria posts a long comment describing last Christmas's Secret Santa incident in detail. She writes about how Rachel deliberately left my name out of the hat and made me sit there watching 40 people open gifts. Aria describes 5-year-old Timmy asking why I didn't get anything, and Rachel shrugging and saying some people don't deserve presents. The comment gets dozens of reactions from family members who were there and witnessed Rachel's cruelty over 7 years. People start sharing their own stories in the replies about times Rachel excluded me or made cruel comments. Kevin's other cousin writes about the wedding when Rachel gave Kevin $5,000, specifically not for me, and made sure everyone heard her say blood family comes first. Another relative mentions Rachel measuring Dorothy's house for renovations while Dorothy was still alive in it. I watch the post turn into a public accounting of Rachel's behavior and feel both vindicated and uncomfortable, because this is Kevin's sister getting destroyed by her own family. Rachel deletes the entire post 3 hours later, but it's too late because multiple people already took screenshots. Kevin's cousin shares the screenshots in the family group chat with a message saying, Rachel needs to take responsibility for her own choices instead of blaming others for the consequences. The group chat explodes with people commenting and arguing. Some defend Rachel, saying family should stick together during hard times. Others point out that Rachel created this situation herself by spending money she didn't have and treating family members cruelly for years. Kevin's mom, Marie, posts in the chat, asking everyone to please stop fighting and remember that Dorothy just died. George adds that Dorothy made her decisions for reasons she explained clearly in her letter, and everyone needs to respect that. The chat goes quiet after his parents intervene, but I can tell the family is permanently divided over this. A letter arrives at our house 4 days later from a law firm I don't recognize. Kevin opens it and his face goes pale as he reads. The letter is from Rachel's lawyer threatening to contest Dorothy's will on grounds of undue influence. The lawyer claims I manipulated Dorothy during a period of diminished mental capacity and isolated her from her family to redirect her assets. Kevin immediately calls Dorothy's lawyer and puts him on speaker. Dorothy's lawyer listens to Kevin read the threatening letter and then actually laughs. He says he anticipated Rachel would try to contest, and he has extensive documentation of Dorothy's mental competency and voluntary decisions. He tells us not to worry because Rachel has no case whatsoever. Dorothy's lawyer explains that Dorothy specifically asked him to document everything because she knew Rachel would react this way. He recorded video of Dorothy explaining her reasoning 3 months before she died when she was completely lucid and competent. The video shows Dorothy describing Rachel's comment about stopping her heart medication and Rachel's pattern of only visiting to discuss inheritance. Dorothy also documented our tea visits and explained that I never asked about money or her will. I just enjoyed her company and listened to her stories. The lawyer has medical records from Dorothy's doctor confirming she was mentally sharp with no signs of dementia or confusion. He has statements from the home health aide who visited Dorothy weekly saying Dorothy was always clear-headed and made her own decisions. The lawyer tells Kevin he'll send all this documentation to Rachel's attorney today. 1 week passes and we receive another letter from Rachel's lawyer. This one is much shorter, saying Rachel is withdrawing her contest of the will. Kevin reads it twice and says this means Rachel's lawyer looked at Dorothy's documentation and told her she had 0 chance of winning. The lawyer probably also told Rachel she'd be wasting money she doesn't have on litigation she'll lose. I feel relief wash over me knowing I won't have to defend myself in court or prove I didn't manipulate Dorothy. Kevin hugs me and says his grandmother protected us even after death by being so thorough with her planning. Kevin's mom, Marie, calls 2 days later with news about Rachel. Marie sounds tired and sad as she tells us Rachel's house is going into foreclosure. Rachel can't make the mortgage payments without the inheritance money she was counting on, and the bank is starting the process to take the house. Marie says Rachel and Philip are moving in with Philip's parents next month. She adds that Philip's mom, Elizabeth, is apparently very unhappy about the situation and blames Rachel for the financial mess. Marie asks if we think Rachel will be okay, and Kevin tells his mother that Rachel made her own choices and has to live with the consequences just like everyone else does. I finally open the cases containing Dorothy's jewelry collection that evening. The pieces are even more beautiful than I remembered from seeing Dorothy wear them at family gatherings. I start going through each item carefully and discover Dorothy left small notes tucked into the velvet lining. The first note I find is attached to a pearl necklace, and Dorothy's handwriting says she wore this to her daughter's wedding in 1972. Another note describes wearing the sapphire earrings to her 50th anniversary dinner. I find notes for almost every major piece explaining which occasions were special enough to wear them. Reading Dorothy's handwriting makes tears run down my face because I miss our conversations and her dry observations about family dynamics. She wrote a note about the ruby ring saying she wore it to Rachel's college graduation, hoping Rachel would grow out of her selfishness, but she never did. The last note I find is attached to the emerald bracelet, and Dorothy wrote that she wants me to wear this piece, and remember that kindness matters more than blood relations. I sit on the floor surrounded by jewelry and notes crying, because Dorothy gave me so much more than expensive items. She gave me validation that I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt by Rachel's exclusion all those years. Kevin finds me the next evening sitting on the floor of our bedroom with jewelry cases spread around me, and tears running down my face as I read Dorothy's handwritten notes for the third time. He doesn't say anything at first, just sits down next to me and picks up the sapphire bracelet that's resting on top of a velvet box. He turns it over in his hands, and his eyes get this distant look like he's remembering something from a long time ago. He tells me Dorothy wore this exact bracelet to his college graduation, and she squeezed his hand afterward, saying she was proud of the man he'd become. I watch his face soften for the first time since the will reading, and something tight in my chest loosens because he finally seems like himself again, instead of the distant stranger who's been living in our house. He sets the bracelet down carefully and takes my hand, and we sit there surrounded by Dorothy's things, not needing to say anything, because we both understand that these pieces mean so much more than their monetary value. Over the next few days, Kevin and I talk about ways to honor Dorothy's memory that don't involve Rachel's bitterness poisoning everything. I suggest hosting a small gathering at our house for the family members who genuinely cared about Dorothy as a person, rather than a bank account. Kevin agrees immediately and says his parents can come, but Rachel and Philip are absolutely not welcome in our home. Hearing him say that out loud feels like he's finally choosing our marriage over protecting his sister from consequences she brought on herself. We spend an afternoon making phone calls and sending invitations to Kevin's parents, his cousins, a few aunts and uncles who always treated Dorothy with real affection. Marie sounds relieved when Kevin tells her about the gathering, and she asks if she can bring photo albums from Dorothy's younger years. Kevin says yes and hangs up looking lighter than he has in weeks. The memorial gathering happens on a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks after the will reading. I wear Dorothy's pearl necklace, the one with the note about her daughter's wedding in 1972, and I feel Dorothy's presence like she's standing right next to me, approving of this celebration. Marie arrives first carrying 2 large photo albums, and she hugs me tightly before setting them on the coffee table. George follows her in, looking uncomfortable but sincere, and he shakes Kevin's hand and tells us this is a good thing we're doing. Other family members filter in over the next hour, and I notice nobody asks where Rachel is, like they all understand why she's excluded. I share stories about our tea visits and how Dorothy would tell me about her travels through Europe in the 60s, when she and her husband backpacked through 7 countries on almost no money. Marie opens one of the photo albums and shows everyone pictures of Dorothy as a young woman, laughing and beautiful and so full of life that it makes my throat tight. Kevin's cousin Margot shares a memory about Dorothy teaching her to bake bread when she was 10 years old, and how Dorothy never rushed her even when Margot made mistakes. The gathering lasts 3 hours and nobody mentions money or inheritance once, which feels exactly right. Margot pulls me aside while other people are looking through photo albums and getting second helpings of the food we put out. She lowers her voice and tells me she heard through the family network that Rachel is working at a department store now, something in the cosmetics section making minimum wage. Philip apparently picked up a second job doing night shifts at a warehouse to try digging them out of the debt hole Rachel created. Margot says she doesn't feel sorry for Rachel because Rachel made her own choices, but she does feel bad for Philip, who didn't know the full extent of Rachel's spending until everything crashed down. I nod and thank her for telling me, and part of me feels vindicated, while another part just feels tired of the whole situation. Margot squeezes my arm and says Dorothy would be proud of how I'm handling everything with grace instead of gloating, which makes me tear up because I hope that's true. A month passes and life starts settling into a new normal without Dorothy and without Rachel's constant presence at family events. Kevin tells me one evening that his parents went to visit Rachel at her in-laws' house where she and Philip are living now. Marie calls him afterward sounding shaken and upset, and Kevin puts her on speaker so I can hear too. Marie says Rachel spent the entire visit listing everything she would have done with Dorothy's $2 million, from the mansion she would have bought to the vacations she had planned to the cars she wanted. Rachel apparently blamed me for ruining her entire life, and said if I hadn't manipulated Dorothy, then everything would be fine. Marie's voice breaks when she tells us that Rachel seems consumed by bitterness and anger, unable to accept that Dorothy made her own choices based on Rachel's own behavior over the years. Kevin tells his mother that Rachel needs to face reality and stop blaming other people for consequences she brought on herself. After the call ends, Kevin holds me while I cry because hearing about Rachel's ongoing hatred hurts, even though I know I didn't do anything wrong. George calls Kevin's phone 2 weeks later, and this time Kevin doesn't put it on speaker, but I can hear his father's voice getting louder and more agitated. Kevin's face goes hard and cold as he listens, and when he finally speaks, his voice is ice. He tells his father that Rachel is not welcome in our home ever again, and we need space from anyone who can't accept that Dorothy made her own choices. I wait until he hangs up to ask what happened, and Kevin tells me that Rachel said she wishes I would die, so the jewelry would come back to the family where it belongs. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I have to sit down because someone actually wished for my death over material possessions. Kevin kneels in front of me and takes both my hands, and promises that we're done trying to maintain a relationship with Rachel, that some things can't be forgiven or overlooked. He says his parents can have a relationship with their daughter if they want, but we're establishing firm boundaries, and Rachel crossed the final line. Over the following weeks, I struggle with guilt about Rachel's situation even though logically I understand I didn't cause any of it. I lie awake some nights thinking about her working retail and living with in-laws who resent her presence, and wonder if I should feel worse than I do. Kevin catches me staring out the window one afternoon lost in these thoughts, and he sits next to me and reminds me of the facts. Rachel spent $300,000 she didn't have yet, based on assumptions about an inheritance nobody promised her in writing. Rachel quit her job the day after Dorothy's funeral before any will was read. Rachel bought a luxury SUV and put an offer on a mansion and threw a celebration party all based on expectations rather than reality. Kevin says Rachel made her own choices and has to live with the consequences just like everyone else does, and my only crime was being kind to his grandmother without expecting anything in return. His words help, but the guilt still creeps in sometimes when I'm alone with my thoughts. Dorothy's lawyer calls me 6 weeks after the will reading about a final detail he forgot to mention during all the chaos. He explains that Dorothy left specific instructions for a small annual donation to be made in my name, to a charity that helps elderly people avoid financial exploitation by family members. The amount is $5,000 per year to come from the interest on a separate account Dorothy set up specifically for this purpose. I have to laugh at the bitter irony because Dorothy essentially created a lasting memorial to exactly what Rachel tried to do to her. The lawyer says Dorothy wrote in her instructions that she hoped this donation would help other elderly people recognize when family members viewed them as ATMs instead of human beings. I thank the lawyer and hang up feeling like Dorothy is still teaching lessons from beyond the grave. Kevin's relationship with Rachel remains completely broken, and he tells his parents during a Sunday dinner at their house that he's not ready to be in the same room with her yet. Marie's face falls, and she asks if he thinks there might be reconciliation someday for the family's sake. Kevin says maybe eventually, but not anytime soon, that Rachel needs to do serious work on herself before he's willing to consider rebuilding any kind of relationship. George nods slowly like he understands even if he doesn't like it, and I feel grateful that Kevin's parents aren't pushing us to forgive and forget, just to make family gatherings easier. Marie hugs me before we leave and whispers that she's sorry for not protecting me better from Rachel's cruelty over the years. I tell her it's not her fault, and that what matters is moving forward, and she squeezes my hand with tears in her eyes. I make an appointment with a jeweler downtown to discuss redesigning one piece of Dorothy's collection into something I can wear every day. I bring the brooch Dorothy wore to my wedding, the one she had on when Rachel gave Kevin $5,000 specifically not for me, and I explain to the jeweler that I want the stones incorporated into a necklace. The jeweler is an older woman with kind eyes who listens to the whole story while examining the brooch, and she says she can create something beautiful that honors both Dorothy's memory and my own journey. 3 weeks later, I pick up the finished necklace and it's absolutely perfect, delicate and elegant with the stones arranged in a way that catches the light. I wear it out of the store and touch it throughout the day, feeling Dorothy's presence and remembering that genuine kindness matters more than blood relations or material wealth. 6 months pass with Kevin wearing Dorothy's necklace redesign around my neck every day, and Rachel sends a letter that arrives in our mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. Kevin opens it at the kitchen table and reads silently for several minutes before sliding the paper across to me. The letter has Rachel's handwriting that I recognize from years of watching her write gift tags for everyone except me, and she apologizes for her behavior over the years and asks if we can meet to talk. Kevin watches my face while I read and asks what I think we should do about meeting with his sister. I set the letter down and tell him I need more time because the apology doesn't actually say sorry for specific things she did to me. Kevin picks up the letter again and reads it more carefully and nods slowly, saying it feels more like Rachel wanting something rather than taking real responsibility for 7 years of deliberate cruelty. I point out that she doesn't mention the wedding where she gave him $5,000, specifically not for me, or the Secret Santa, where she told Timmy some people don't deserve presents. Kevin agrees the letter is vague and self-serving, and he's not ready to reconcile with someone who hasn't actually acknowledged what she did wrong. Marie calls the following week and mentions during casual conversation that Rachel told her she's been selling her designer clothes and jewelry to make debt payments. Kevin's mom says Rachel and Philip are slowly paying down what they owe, but it will take years to recover financially from the spending spree after Dorothy's death. I feel a strange mix of satisfaction and discomfort hearing about Rachel's continued struggles, because part of me wanted consequences for her cruelty, but another part feels guilty watching someone suffer even when they brought it on themselves. Marie tells me Rachel sold the luxury SUV and bought a used sedan and moved from Philip's parents' house into a small apartment they can barely afford. Kevin listens to his mother's updates and his jaw tightens, but he doesn't say anything about helping his sister or feeling sorry for her situation. October arrives and George calls to invite us to Thanksgiving dinner at their house. Kevin puts the phone on speaker and his father mentions that Rachel won't be there because they're doing separate celebrations this year to avoid tension. I feel relieved hearing we won't have to see Rachel, but also sad that the family is permanently broken by her choices and Dorothy's response to them. George says they'll have Thanksgiving with Rachel and Philip on Friday, and with us and other family members on Thursday, so everyone can enjoy the holiday without conflict. Kevin thanks his father and says we'll be there Thursday, and after hanging up he squeezes my hand, knowing I'm processing complicated feelings about family gatherings that used to include his sister. Thanksgiving Thursday comes, and we arrive at George and Marie's house carrying pumpkin pie and wine. The dining room fills with Kevin's cousins and aunts and uncles who all hug me warmly and ask how I'm doing. Margot pulls out her phone during appetizers and asks if I have pictures of Dorothy's jewelry collection that she can see. I open my photo album and show images of the sapphire bracelet and emerald ring and pearl necklace, while several family members gather around to look. Margot comments that Dorothy had perfect taste, and the pieces suit me beautifully, which makes Marie smile from across the room. Kevin's aunt asks if I wear the jewelry often, and I touch the necklace at my throat that was redesigned from Dorothy's brooch, and explain that I have this piece made into something I can wear every day as a reminder of our friendship. George pulls Kevin aside after dinner, and I watch them talking seriously in the other room through the doorway. Kevin's posture changes during the conversation, and he nods several times while his father speaks with his hand on Kevin's shoulder. They return to the dining room 15 minutes later, and Kevin seems quieter than before, and after we get home that night, he tells me what his father said. George admitted that he and Marie failed to address Rachel's behavior over the years, and they regret not protecting me from her cruelty at family gatherings. Kevin says his father apologized for making excuses about Rachel being forgetful, when they all knew she deliberately excluded me from gift exchanges and celebrations. I feel tears forming because having George acknowledge what happened validates 7 years of feeling invisible and hurt while everyone watched. The next morning, I find George and Marie in their kitchen before we leave town and tell them I appreciate the acknowledgement of what Rachel did. Marie's eyes fill with tears, and she asks if I can forgive them for not standing up to their daughter sooner. I tell them honestly that what matters most now is that Kevin and I are solid, and I have good memories of Dorothy to hold on to instead of bitterness about Rachel. Marie hugs me tightly and says Dorothy would be proud of how I've handled everything with grace instead of revenge. George adds that watching me wear Dorothy's jewelry and speak kindly about his mother reminds him that character shows through actions, not words. December approaches, and I think about last Christmas where Rachel organized Secret Santa and deliberately left my name out of the hat. I remember sitting there watching 40 people open gifts while 5-year-old Timmy asked why I didn't deserve presents, and Rachel shrugged, saying not everyone can be special. This year feels different because Kevin and I decide to host Christmas dinner at our house, and Rachel isn't invited, which feels like the ultimate reversal of every holiday where she was excluded me. Kevin suggests we create the kind of celebration Dorothy would have wanted with genuine warmth instead of performative gift-giving. We sit at our dining room table with invitation cards and make a list of family members who showed genuine kindness over the years. Kevin and I address envelopes to his parents and Margot and other cousins and aunts and uncles who brought me extra gifts when Rachel forgot me. The guest list notably excludes Rachel and Philip, which makes our boundaries clear to everyone receiving invitations. I write personal notes inside each card mentioning specific moments when that person showed me kindness during years of exclusion. Kevin reads my notes and says Dorothy would love seeing me create the family gathering. Rachel never allowed me to be part of with grace instead of spite. Marie calls 3 days after receiving her invitation and asks if we're sure about excluding Rachel from Christmas. Her voice sounds uncertain, and she says it feels harsh, even though she understands why we're doing it. I gently remind Marie about 7 years of deliberate exclusion and the Secret Santa incident where Rachel told a child I didn't deserve presents in front of the whole family. Marie goes quiet on the phone for several seconds before saying she needed that reality check because she'd been starting to feel sorry for Rachel's financial situation and forgetting the cruelty that caused Dorothy to change her will. Kevin takes the phone and tells his mother that Rachel made choices and we're making ours, and we hope she and George will still come to our house for Christmas. Marie says yes, they'll be there, and she's proud of us for setting healthy boundaries even when it's difficult. Marie says yes, they'll be there, and she's proud of us for setting healthy boundaries even when it's difficult. I start shopping for Christmas gifts the next week and walk through stores thinking about what each person would actually like instead of what looks expensive or impressive. For George, I find a book about vintage cars because I remember him mentioning he used to restore them in his 20s. For Marie, I pick out a soft scarf in her favorite shade of blue that she can wear when she takes her morning walks. For Margot, I choose a photo album so she can organize the pictures of Timmy that she's always talking about wanting to display. Kevin helps me wrap everything at our dining room table, and we use simple brown paper with twine instead of the elaborate bows and ribbons Rachel always used to show off. He runs his hand over one of the wrapped packages and tells me Dorothy would love seeing me create the kind of family gathering Rachel never allowed me to be part of. I arrange the gifts under our tree, and the pile looks smaller than Rachel's displays, but somehow more meaningful. On Christmas Eve, I'm making cookies when my phone buzzes with a text from Margot, asking if she can bring an extra gift for me since Rachel won't be there to forget me this year. I laugh out loud, and Kevin looks up from the dough he's rolling, asking what's funny. I show him the message, and he shakes his head smiling before I text back that it won't be necessary, but I appreciate her looking out for me all these years. Margot responds with 3 heart emojis and says she's excited to see our house decorated. Christmas morning arrives cold and bright, and I wake up nervous about hosting even though I've been planning this for weeks. Kevin squeezes my hand and reminds me that everyone coming today actually wants to be here. The doorbell rings at 11, and suddenly our house fills with family members who hug me warmly and compliment the decorations I spent days arranging. George walks through our living room looking at the lights and ornaments and comments that this feels more like Dorothy's spirit of genuine connection than the performative gatherings Rachel used to orchestrate around gift displays. Marie helps me set out food in the kitchen and tells me she can feel the difference in the energy compared to previous years. We gather in the living room for the gift exchange, and everyone participates equally without anyone being left out or forgotten. I watch Kevin's face light up as family members thank each other sincerely for thoughtful presents instead of expensive ones. Marie opens her scarf and immediately wraps it around her shoulders before leaning over to whisper to me that this is what Christmas should feel like. I realize Dorothy's final gift was teaching everyone the difference between genuine relationships and transactional ones. Timmy sits on the floor surrounded by wrapping paper and suddenly looks up at Margot asking where Rachel is this year. The room goes quiet for a second before Margot gently explains that Rachel is spending Christmas with other family. Timmy nods and says he's glad because last year Rachel made him feel bad for asking why I didn't get presents. Several adults exchange uncomfortable glances, but nobody corrects him because he's just being honest about what he remembers. After dinner, I go to our bedroom and bring out the emerald ring Dorothy wore to family gatherings. Everyone gathers around as I hold it up to the light and share the story Dorothy told me about her husband proposing with it 60 years ago. Marie gets teary-eyed and George clears his throat several times while I describe how Dorothy said yes while wearing her best dress at a restaurant overlooking the harbor. Other family members start sharing their own memories of Dorothy, and the room fills with laughter and a few more tears. Kevin's parents pull us aside before leaving, and George says watching today made him realize how much damage Rachel's exclusion caused over the years, and how strong our marriage is for surviving it. Marie adds that she's proud of how I've turned hurt into grace instead of bitterness. They hug us both and promise to come back for New Year's Eve. January arrives with snow and cold temperatures, and I'm sorting mail when I see an envelope with Rachel's handwriting. My stomach tightens, but I open it and find a 3-page letter specifically apologizing for the wedding incident, the Secret Santa exclusion, and years of treating me as invisible. The letter acknowledges she was cruel because she resented me for being kind to Dorothy in ways Rachel couldn't be bothered to be. She writes that watching me receive the inheritance made her realize Dorothy saw through her fake devotion. Kevin reads the letter when he gets home from work, and we sit together on the couch discussing whether this apology feels genuine. He points out that this letter names specific incidents and takes responsibility instead of making excuses. I tell Kevin I'm willing to meet with Rachel for coffee to hear what she has to say, though I'm not promising forgiveness or restored relationship. He nods and says he thinks that's fair, and he'll text Rachel to set something up. 2 weeks later, we meet Rachel at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. She walks in looking different with less polish and more wear showing in her face and clothes. We sit at a corner table and Rachel orders plain coffee instead of the elaborate drinks she used to get. She tells me she's been in therapy working on her entitlement issues and materialism. She says she's finally understanding that Dorothy's will wasn't about me manipulating anyone, but about Rachel's own failures to be a decent person. Rachel sets her coffee cup down, and her hands shake slightly as she looks directly at me for the first time. She says she needs to tell me something that makes her sick to think about now. She admits she once suggested to Dorothy that maybe the heart medication was doing more harm than good, and perhaps Dorothy should consider stopping it to see how she felt naturally. The words hang in the air between us, and I feel my stomach turn, because that's not a casual suggestion about medication. That's Rachel trying to speed up an inheritance. She says she's horrified by who she became when all she could think about was money and what she'd do with it. She doesn't ask me to forgive her or try to explain away what she did. She just sits there looking smaller than I've ever seen her, and says she caused real pain to me and to Dorothy, and she's working on becoming someone different. Kevin shifts in his seat next to me, and I can feel his tension, because hearing his sister admit to something this dark changes everything about their relationship. I take a breath and tell Rachel I appreciate that she's being honest and taking responsibility, but 7 years of deliberately making me feel invisible and unwanted can't just disappear because we had one conversation over coffee. Rachel nods slowly and stares at her hands while I continue talking. I say that she made me dread every family gathering and every holiday for years, and watching everyone else open gifts while I sat there like furniture really damaged something in me. Rachel looks up with tears in her eyes and says she understands completely, and she's not expecting things to go back to normal or even be good between us. She adds that she hopes maybe someday I might be willing to have a distant but civil relationship for Kevin's sake and for future family events where we'll both be present. She says she knows that's asking a lot, but she wants to at least be able to be in the same room without making everyone uncomfortable. Kevin finally speaks up and tells Rachel he needs a lot more time to rebuild any kind of trust with her, but he's willing to work toward having a relationship again if she keeps going to therapy and shows real change over time instead of just saying the right things once. Rachel wipes her eyes and agrees immediately. She says she knows she completely destroyed the sibling bond they used to have, and she needs to earn back even the most basic level of civility and respect. She tells Kevin she doesn't expect him to include her in holidays or family events right now, and she'll understand if it takes years before he's ready. Kevin nods and we finish our coffee quickly, because the conversation feels too heavy to continue. We leave the coffee shop and drive home mostly in silence, both processing what just happened and what it might mean for the future. 6 months pass with occasional texts between Kevin and Rachel, but no in-person meetings. George calls to invite us to a small family barbecue at their house, and mentions casually that Rachel will be there too. I feel my chest tighten at the news, but Kevin squeezes my hand and asks if I'm okay with going. I tell him we can't avoid her forever, and this is our first family event together since the will reading happened. The day of the barbecue arrives, and I deliberately choose to wear Dorothy's emerald ring on my right hand, where it catches the sunlight. We arrive at George and Marie's house, and I spot Rachel immediately standing near the fence on the far side of the yard, talking quietly with Marie. Rachel glances over when we walk in but doesn't approach us or wave, just gives a small nod of acknowledgement before turning back to her conversation. Throughout the afternoon, Rachel stays on her side of the yard while we stay on ours, and the physical distance feels intentional and respectful of the boundaries we set. I'm helping Marie bring out food when I catch Rachel looking at my hand where Dorothy's emerald ring sits, and her expression isn't the bitter anger I expected, but something softer that might be regret or acceptance or both. I realize in that moment that Dorothy's final lesson was teaching all of us that genuine relationships can't be bought or inherited, but have to be earned through consistent kindness over time. Kevin appears beside me and takes my hand, squeezing it gently, and I know that whatever happens with Rachel going forward, our marriage survived this test. Dorothy's memory will always remind me that being excluded from Rachel's performative gift-giving was actually protection from having to participate in something hollow and meaningless.